Coming up in this episode,
we are heading away from individualism at a frightening rate. In order to understand our world, you've got to realize that selfhood is not valued or loved at all. The one thing people are morbidly antithetical to is selfhood. They're lovers of death, not lovers of life. And once this is fully grasped and understood, you're no longer able to be fooled. You are the sage.
You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Here for the Truth podcast. I'm Joel Rafidi. Got my co-host Yerasimos with me as always. And today it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Michael Tsarion back to our platform. For anyone that knows our origin story, Michael, David Whitehead, who's a previous guest, and their podcast Unslaved played an absolute crucial role in the formation of our own podcast. In fact, Yerasimos and I would never have met, and this podcast probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the work that they are doing. You know, me first hearing and coming across Yerasimos through an Unslaved podcast back in 2021. So always a pleasure to host Michael. Definitely one of the most prominent researchers, deepest researchers, deep thinker, one of the greatest minds in this overarching entire truth-seeking world that we find ourselves immersed in over a number of decades now. He's been at this. And today we're diving into existentialism, which is at the core of his latest book, Existentialism and the Search for Meaning. And I think this is a concept, when properly fleshed out and properly understood, can definitely impact you and will change you and will affect the way that you show up in the world and show up for yourself. So really hope you guys enjoy this conversation. Michael Tsarion returns for the 6th time to Here for the Truth. He's an author and researcher renowned for his profound investigations into ancient civilizations, occult history, psychology, hidden power structures, and so much more. He co-hosts the podcast Unslaved with David Whitehead, who we've also had on the show multiple times, which definitely remains an absolute treasure vault for any sincere seeker on the path. And today's conversation is inspired by his latest book, Existentialism and the Search for Meaning, which I believe is available exclusively through his Substack at the moment. Michael, good to see you again.
Hey, guys. Thank you so much. It's great to see you both. Great to be back on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know we chatted briefly just before, but I guess just for the audience sake, how's things going with you and the continued evolution of your work, I guess?
Oh, everything's really busy right now. We're in the middle of a series called the Dead Sea Scrolls Deception. And we're just in the process of uploading part 4, which is a epic mammoth. You could think of the first 3 as introductory, actually. But setting that introduction, we're well on our way now. And there could be another 3, 4. I don't know. We don't have an exact plan of how far we're going to go. But it's absolutely massive. I'm relying on... it's one of the hardest projects I've done podcast-wise because it's very demanding. And I'm digging out, files that maybe are 10, 15 years been sitting on the shelf and repurposing those, because I've just learned so much down through the years. I don't stop, learning. So we're at a point now where it's just become so massive. But I found a thread, through this great mystery. And yeah, we're enthused, and it's a very, very inspiring, series that we're doing right now. Very enthused. That's why it gets me through, because there's so much information there to process, but it's inspiring.
Yeah.
And very educational. So yeah, we're right in the middle of that.
Amazing.
We're Unslaved.
Yeah, looking forward to checking that out for sure. It sounds very interesting. And I just want to reflect, I love how inspired you remain when it comes to your work. Can you speak a little bit into that process and what this work, what pursuing your interests and passions and diving deep, what that does for your vitality generally as you continue to, I guess, progress through life? Because, it's something that's really meaningful to me, just seeing how inspired you continue to be on this path.
Well, Joel, as we've talked before, this is not a matter of recreation or occupation for me. It's been vocational from day one.
Yeah.
And that means that all sorts of other avenues that could have made me a lot more money, including music and a lot of other things, have all sort of taken, they either haven't manifested or I've willfully, turned away. And vocation is something you don't do. It's something that does you. It owns you.
Yeah.
It's more connected to duty in a way, although there's some very not good, applications of duty. But no, in the purest sense, in the purest, highest sense, it is a duty. To what? I don't know. Earlier in my life, I thought in terms of, mankind, humankind, I've lost all the coordinates of that. I just perform like a robot. So it's all in the rear view mirror, whether it's pleasure, whether it's pain, whether it's satisfying me, whether, tomorrow, what's going to happen tomorrow? Will we be trending? Will we not be trending? Will I be more popular? This is all long. It's so far in the rear view mirror, I don't even remember those days. It's just pure function, pure duty.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. But yes, to answer your question, I just live for the next project.
Yeah.
And almost nothing else. My life is entirely about, see, remember there was decades of the research, and then you get this little window to come on and talk to people. So although people go, you've been around for a long time. No, to me, it doesn't seem like that at all. And there's still so much work to do. So all of that research, I'm just going to do and let it sit on the shelf. No, this window is, so this is why I get the passion, because I've just been given this little moment to get it out to a worldwide audience. Man, you can't help but being enthused by that, because there's so much brilliant research there to bring out. And I get totally thrilled when I know I'm sharing that with other people, on podcasts just like this.
Yeah.
Love it, Michael. Well, speaking of projects, you released a recent book, Existentialism and the Search for Meaning. You've been talking about existentialism for a while. What inspired this new iteration?
It started in 1993. Had done some philosophy before that, but wouldn't lean on that. A couple of night class type things, But in 1993, I was checking into it was really poetry I was studying at the time. Just left for America in September of '89. And one book I had by a German poet. And again, the usual story, loving the poetry, but not understanding a fucking word, right? I mean, this is the way it is. And this had been since I was 6 years old reading William Blake. Same thing. Pretty, very pretty words, tiger, tiger, burning bright, and all that stuff. What does it mean, right? No, sorry, big fucking, big strike through there, right? So it was the same in '93, loving what I was reading, but under no clue where to go. You can't go to other poets, because even though the other poets might be influenced by such and such, Rilke or Hölderlin or Schiller or whatever, their poetry isn't helping you explicate. It's just more poetry. It's like T.S. Eliot could be influenced by William Blake, right? Or the American Wallace Stevens, or somebody like that, or Sylvia Plath or Ted Hughes. They can be influenced by a previous poet, but you're not going to find in their work an explanation of the poet. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for an explanation, but you don't look to other poetry for that. They're influenced by it, but they're not going to tell you anything. They're not going to give you an insight into the meaning of the poetry. So where do you turn for that? Philosophy. I didn't know that at the time, right? But it became obvious that philosophy, what? But yeah, the deeper poets, and for goodness sake, particularly William Blake, every line, and then he was down on the philosophers of his own time. He was always, firing darts at John Locke and Isaac Newton and Boyle and Hobbes, any of these materialists. So I'm thinking, he's already not in favor of philosophy. But he has a philosophy of his own, you see. So in 1993, now I'm tackling this German stuff, this German poetry, and I'm back in the same hole. Oh, no, don't tell me I got to go to philosophy. But there's nothing you can do, right? So this is, to answer your question, Yerasimos, is how it started. I didn't want to, believe you me, and it's been a struggle for 32 years since that point, but it was inevitable. If you really love the poetry, you're going to have to dig very deep, because there's something extraordinary about that poetry. And to really know it, I'm afraid to have it explicated didactically, yeah, I'm afraid you do need to then, go to the German philosophers or people like that. And when I did, yes, it came very, very slowly, right? But it came. This is the most important thing. And so then that inspired me, and then later on, taking notes, doing a lot of articles that you may have seen through the years, but finally it became obvious that, probably should write a book on it.
Who was the first existentialist that you came across?
In 1988, I took a basic class, and I took it the following year in Ireland, in Belfast, and we studied Nietzsche, who, although not an existentialist, is loosely considered a proto-existentialist, because he toys with some of the ideas. Technically speaking, it's Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, and maybe in the 18th century, he started it. And technically, if you stretch it, then there's a guy, the famous mathematician Blaise Pascal, and both men were Christians. We should note that both men were Christians. There's a large myth out there that existentialism is all about absurdity and bleakness and atheism, and that's the way, of course, the public has received it. But as a matter of fact, over 80%, and this includes Fyodor Dostoevsky and people like that, these people were Christians. Amazingly. So again, there's a huge myth about that. But yeah, I wasn't really paying attention, but the Nietzsche stuff that we studied in that class would have been about the first.
Yeah.
And then I don't know how I got to Heidegger in 93. I guess this connection I was telling you about you're not going to understand the poetry that you're reading. I don't know how I heard this, but I heard that, Heidegger was deeply into these people, and in his works, you'd find this seam, like a gold digger, you would find this seam of rich ore, and then you'd have it. And that was intriguing, so there was a lot of obstacles.
Yeah.
I got fired from many jobs because all I would do would read all day, in these places at work and whatever. It was terrible, but we won't go into all of that. But again, as I say, very gradually it started to come. It started to fall into place. But it was meticulous. It was extremely meticulous and hugely dedicated through the years.
Cool. I guess for a listener who has no idea about this term existentialism, how do we begin on a basic level to flesh that out? Like, i.e., what is existentialism? Maybe we can start there.
Oh, well, the main thing to think about is the word existence, We rarely think about it. We're in it, we do it.
Yeah.
But we don't think about it. It's invisible by proximity. We exist, but we've never unpacked that phenomenologically. So that's what it's about. It's heavily based in individualism and the question of whether that's even a sound basis of life, and that's all weighed up, because it may not be.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be. Hey, we came out of tribes. What about Mother Nature, where the individual doesn't appear to have any role at all? It's all about the genus and the species and all of this. So, okay, what about that? So a great deal to do with the one against the many. And this is what, for me anyway, I don't know if that's a good definition of what existentialism is, but for me, that was the intriguing thing, because I came to existentialism through Ayn Rand, a very non-existential person, but there's a tiny little bridge between her work, and it's a very valuable one. And it's this thing about the one against the many. Now, she wouldn't like to be called an existentialist because existentialism tended to, in her mind, to be left-wing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big no-no. She'd grown up in Soviet Russia and was highly spooked by anything collectivistic, socialistic. And that's right, I am too. I agree with that. And I'm not left-wing either. But because things are sometimes left-wing doesn't stop me studying it, though. They may have something very interesting to say about life, and I think they do, right? But as I said, it's wrong to consider existentialism just purely a left-wing, and political in that way. Some of the top existentialists were that, there's no question about that, but many, many, many more were not. So that has to be borne in mind. But it's about existence, it's about death, largely, right? And it's non-metaphysical, I suppose, would be another way to look at it. They're suspicious. This did come out of Nietzsche, by the way. This is where Nietzsche comes in, as I mentioned earlier, and even Schopenhauer to that degree. They were suspicious of large, abstract questions that philosophy seemed to have been preoccupied with for 2,000 years. And even materialism, it sounds like a paradox, but it's true. Materialism is interested in some of the larger metaphysical questions that the existentialists said they can't even be answered. So why are you bothering with it? I can give you an example in a minute if you want, but
Yeah, sure.
there's these big questions and they can't be answered. So why are you guys all relying on reason all the time? You know, science stroke reason, right? And of course, we know that you could easily rebut that. You could easily come back and go, what would happen if we didn't have science? Like, what's wrong with you people? Are you anti-scientific? They went, no, it's not about that. It's about what have you done to sell yourselves to religion, to science, that something may have fallen by the wayside of your humanity, your essential existence that remains forever unseen to you, right? While you commit to these paradigms. Of course, nobody could understand what it's all about, right? The religious person couldn't understand it anymore, you know, than the science group. They went, what is all this gobbledygook, you know? And so the existentialists said, look, you scientists have thrown away God, haven't you? And they went, well, okay, we concede, yeah, we've thrown away God. They go, all right, what's so good about that? And then they turn to the religious guy and goes, you've thrown away nature. You two are responsible for throwing out huge chunks of what it means to be alive. And now you want to get in my face? So that they came in with a secret left hook that nobody knew about, right? And they said, well, let's further explore that. But the other thing that was important about existentialism is that it caught on. No philosophical movement ever had caught on amongst painters, writers, poets, and musicians, but existentialism did. In fact, many people know it through plays. Some of them were even playwrights. Like, as I just mentioned, Fyodor Dostoevsky, one of the greatest novelists that ever lived. Gabriel Marcel was a poet, musician, and playwright. Exceptional. Even the left-wing Jean-Paul Sartre wrote novels. Albert Camus wrote novels. Mm-hmm. And many other quasi-existentialists went out and wrote novels. Oh my God, in fact, you can't even count the amount of influence that it had over surrealism, Dadaism, abstract, you know, Cubism, and all the other movement, even reaching to America.
Yeah. So when someone defines themselves as an existentialist, like, what are they saying about themselves? What are the characteristics that might make someone an existentialist? Is it simply that their primary focus is on being and existence as opposed to,
Yes. What separates them? It's thinking, you know, what is unique about me? I have a very short life to live. How am I making my mark? Am I just going along to get along? Or am I doing something that expresses myself? This is why it caught on amongst, you know, the younger generation in those days, and was films.
Yeah.
I mentioned a few of the best in the book, but there are hundreds of black and white films, you know, and even modern day film. Blade Runner. Mm-hmm. The whole thing ends on an existential note in that final conversation on the rooftop. That's pure existentialism. You know, and it's there in many other movies. You would be amazed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just this idea of differentiation. Because I'm born of a mother and I'm in a family constellation. Isn't there something very odd about that? If I'm born out of the cells of my mother's body when I'm a child in the womb, that's called cloning. And if my mother has 2 or 3 other children, we should all be robots. We should be all clones of her. We're literally built, our very physicality is built out of the cells, and even, you would say, even some of the consciousness of the mother. But guess what? I'm born an individual. All right, so where's this moment where this invisible angel came along and went bing and made me what I am that's totally different than my brothers and sisters and not even remotely like my mother?
Yeah.
That's not a mystery to you? The physicality, the materialist, can't explain this, right? So that's why it's not materialism. And these atheist existentialists, they're way off the mark. I don't know what they think they are. So don't judge what existentialism is by those twogs. I come out of a womb in which I should just be a clone in every sense of the word, and yet I'm not.
Yeah.
How do I account for that? So that would be the kind of thing that look at. No metaphysics, no abstractia. And if that comes in, it's really downstream. It may come in, but it's downstream. I want to look at the actual concrete facts of my life. And then if I do commit to science or I do commit to religion, what are the consequences of that? It's not that I don't do it. Hey, maybe I have a leaning towards being an engineer or an electrician. I'm not going to stop that. Maybe I like chemistry and I want to do it. But I'm going to do it with this other level of reflection. It's what Gabriel Marcel calls secondary reflection. The primary reflection is just when you're this close up, you're melded and welded with the life that you experience every day. And there's no detachment, no separation, where I'm looking at everything I do, but in this sort of detached, but deeply meaningful perspective. How do I fit into a larger context? Most people don't do that, so whatever existentialism is doesn't matter. The whole human race couldn't be concerned. They're in only primary reflection, and they don't have this quality of stepping back and seeing themselves in more of the whole, the way the movie, say, Fearless with Jeff Bridges, portrays, or Paris, Texas, or something like that. They don't, this is different. But there is that perspective. It does exist. It doesn't stop you being part of the crowd or part of society, but it's a slightly different perspective that you're taking whilst you're amid it.
Hey, everyone. Hope you're enjoying this episode. We wanted to make this announcement that for Friends of the Truth, our membership community, we're going to be doing a cap on membership very shortly. And so if you want to get in at the current price, it's $17 a month if you go monthly, and it's $12 a month if you sign up for the year. Now's the time to do it. Would love to see you in there. Would love to keep engaging, get to know you, and just continue to live our best lives together.
Yeah, so you can sign up at hereforthetruth.com/FOTT.
Hey, Michael, we talk about this mystery of what makes a person individual. They're born in a family and yet they come out differently. Like, you're a student of and a teacher of the Hermetic arts and more esoteric things out there. I'm into human design, astrology. Like, what role do these systems play in like the existentialism as well? Like what does it mean to be alive and to be unique, to be an individual? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I don't think there is a connection really.
Okay.
On the whole. Those things would be looked at, I guess, suspiciously, or they just are bracketed. They don't play a direct role. If anything, they would come under the same rubric as religion.
Gotcha.
They'd get the same treatment.
Mm-hmm.
They'd be saying, well, these are occult practices. This is a form of religious belief, and yeah, we can look at that, whether it's meaningful or not. But it wouldn't play a direct role, especially for these Christian existentialists I was talking about. You can imagine, right? They wouldn't want anything much to do with that.
Yeah. It makes sense, because I think to be a great artist, you have to be a great rebel at heart. And it kind of makes sense that the artists and the playwrights and the great novelists would be drawn to this, because it is the rebellious path in a sense. It is like, I'm not into the status quo. I'm not into what the crowd is doing and where they're going. For me to really bring something forth that is unique and great, I have to consider what others aren't considering. And that is, I guess, the question of my being.
Definitely. This is exactly right. And Heidegger went so far as to say that there's something repulsive. Mankind has found something repulsive in the question of being. And the whole philosophical tradition decided way back, at the time of Aristotle, to simply not deal with it. Now, of course, he had to prove that. He had to make his case. Not everybody believed that, but he seemed to make a strong case that the question of being is simply not being asked, and that philosophy went in a different direction. I can summarize it by, as I do in the book, by saying that the metaphysician from Aristotle's time onwards start preoccupying himself with the whatness of things. What are they? Whereas the real question of the existentialist is that they are. So it's not what things are, it's that they are. Why are they there as opposed to not there? And there was this famous aphorism that was used multiple times in the past, and then Haidiger reprised it in one of his works, one of his talks that was transcribed into his book. And he said, why is there something rather than nothing?
Mm-hmm.
It had been asked by Leibniz. It had been asked by Schelling, the famous German idealist, specifically. But then here comes Heidegger and makes it central to his teachings. Why is there something rather than nothing? And there's a lot that hangs on that question. And what it is doing is trying to explicate that something exists. Now, again, it sounds abstract, but wait a minute, doesn't it apply to you? Well, Heidegger said it damn well does. Why am I here? I didn't elect to be born, but I find myself thrown into this world. And then I'm lumbered with it. Now, I do see myself getting along with it, just like my son or daughter, when I give birth to child, they seem to be just climbing the walls, right? There's this efficacy. They don't shrink back and hide, right?
Yeah.
They are full blown, right? Adjusted somehow, despite their physical and mental inferiority. They're reaching out to the world. So we do have that. But the thing is, I didn't elect to be born. So that's a huge mystery right there.
What if is it possible that we did elect to be born? Is that a possibility?
Oh, of course it is. I mean, again, remember we're talking about some of these people being deeply religious.
Yeah.
Naturally, they would say it's from God. But see, the thing is that is such a cliche. That's such an obvious label that you can rely on, right? The existentialist is trying to pull away from these collectively accepted standard quotient. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah,
we're not saying throw it away and abandon it forever. We're just parking. We're just bracketing it and saying, yeah, but if that's not the case, could that then describe? Because if it was the case and we knew it, why are we drenched in anxiety? The anxiety that's there underneath, the normal flow of life, kind of doesn't really work that way, right? We're drenched in it. So then we want to now shift the game to studying this anxiety, which no philosophy had ever done. This, what they call ontological dread. So ontology is stuff that you don't choose. Like I just give you one example, right? We're thrown into the world without choice. That's ontological. Death is another one. No matter what science is out there, no matter what religion says, our individual, private, personal life ends. That's ontological. Nothing you or I or anybody else can do about it, even God. We're gone, right? Look, people die all around us, sometimes violently, sometimes very young. What? You see? So these are ontological. So this became very important to the existentialists. If there's if we've isolated two ontological states, maybe there's more, so they start looking for, and then they come up with facticity, and a few other things that become very, very important to their philosophy. And one of the other things that they came up, there's more an element of choice in this one, but it's still somewhat, it's on the alignment between the ontic and the ontological, is this immersion in the crowd consciousness, and this immersion in the everyday, the gray everyday, anonymous, became a huge part of it, and was very, very attractive to, as I say, these artists and these filmmakers and poets. This part, it's only one part of existentialism, but it became very, very, very important. And of course it did. Look at the industrialization of Europe at the time. Look at the world wars. Look at the mass mind. And then along comes media, the television. And one of the most baneful things was commercials, the whole advertising nightmare. And so this had to be addressed in modernity, questions of modernity. Where does the individual fit in all of this? Can I determine who I am amid all of this panoply of images of who I should be? And Joseph von Sternberg, the list goes on of the fantastic directors who were adamantly wanting to portray this anonymity of the human being and him being overwhelmed, by it all the images of what you should be. Then who the hell am I actually? Became massive, and still is there. It's in the underground still.
Yeah. Michael,
So there's all these things came to bear.
yeah. Can you talk more about the anxiety element of this? Like,
Yeah.
I know you talk about like fear of death versus the anxiety that comes from just like, what does it take to be a true self, an authentic individual?
Well, that is connected to death. See, the word authenticity, you can't separate it from what Heidegger called being toward death. It's ontological again. Since death is a reality. Oh, and another one would be time, the very movement of the three moments of time. He called it the three ecstasies of time based on the Greek meaning of the word, but we don't need to get into all of that, right? These three stages of time, past, present, and future, they're ontological as well. And using his theories of time, he was able to get that crowbar underneath most metaphysics. It's what he wanted to do, and this was his means of doing it. So I'm glad you asked about that. But specifically to what you're talking about, he said that the human being, no other animal can do this, is project their mind forward. It's called protention in time, out of where we are now. And his word for this was transcendence. See, outside of its religious and spiritual.
Yeah.
This is why it was so like, whoa. It's like, what? It's like ice water over everyone, right? He spoke of transcendence, but not in any religious connotation. The transcendence that man enjoys is definitely a real thing, but it's temporal transcendence. We are the beings who can step out of our now, project our minds forward to a not now, in the future, and see what that beholds. And for him, the most important tense is the future. It's everything. And no one had ever spoken of this before. A little bit, maybe an Henri Bergson, the French philosopher, but nobody as deeply as Heidegger did. But of course, one thing that happens when you project your mind forward comes this possibility that you're not going to be around for very long. One day, everything that you're engaged in this extremely existential, phenomenological, embedded way, those are possibilities that you care for and that you enjoy and that you're welded to. One day that's going to stop without your election. So there's another source of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
We have a podcast called, I think, the 10 Forms of Anxiety. When you do a deep dive into existentialism, you come out with like 10, 11, I don't know, we try to cover them all. I'm just talking here about one or two of them. The anxiety of feeling thrown into the world does give you a pause, even though children quickly seem to override it. No, underneath that, there is this apprehension of the fragile, soul that's sort of like, where the hell am I? What is all this? So there's an anxiety from that, a mood of anxiety. Then, of course, the contemplation of death. And in the middle between those two, there's others, like your will clashing against other wills, causes anxiety. And there's more than two or three of these. But the mega one, right? The mega one is this temporal finitude, being toward death. But back to the point, there can be no authenticity. It's just a word. It's just a fashion statement, unless the person squarely faces up to this finitude and rebounds from the future back to the present as a different person. So imagine it's like an elastic band or a time machine. The authentic person must project his mind into the future. He must squarely face the fact of his non-existence and the inevitability of this nothingness outside of any religious, stabilizers. Come back, and when he comes back, he's not the same. Again, it's like the movie Fearless. Is like a step-by-step breakdown of this fantastic film, right?
Is the point that kind of like in our contemplation of death, sincerely, we become more authentic because, the social norms, the everydayness that Heidegger called it, it becomes intolerable in a sense as we contemplate the finite.
Yes. It becomes intolerable to the point of we are catapulted out of it. Just by this simple exercise of realizing how brief things are. Something in me, and it's conscience is what it is, now will not allow me to go along to get along like one of the fish in the shoal, one of the sheep in the field,
Yeah.
It just doesn't. And my field would be my family, my surroundings. So this can have a tremendous seismic and very, in one way, destructive feel. It can make me feel very fragile and dissociated and disenfranchised. Therefore, more anxiety. But like Ayn Rand indicates, and Heidegger would agree, hey, shouldn't you be in anxiety if you've thrown away your soul?
Mhm.
Forget about death. Your immersion in the collective as a non-entity, a gray, anonymous being, what the hell? You should be deeply anxious from that alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why you keep seeing all the distractions, all the alcohol abuse, all the drug abuse, all the
You got
sex addiction, everything is to keep that reality from coming up to the surface to even face
That's
it.
right. The root is down here, but we flee it. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, okay, yeah, my book will adopt a slightly tangential aspect to this, because although Heidegger was adamant that this thing we've just described, projecting into the future and coming back, will make a person authentic, we look around us all the time and don't find anybody doing it. The thing we just mentioned just now about you having anxiety about being immersed in the crowd, yeah, but we don't see too many people, radically becoming authentic because of that. So wait a minute, does this mean that you throw existentialism out, or is there something we've misread, or there's a fresh? That's why I thought I wrote my book for, right? That maybe there's a new perspective that some of these other guys may have missed or didn't explore as much. And so I come at it like that. I'll explain the party line, and the textbook definition of authenticity, which we've just done. But then it leaves a clever person to say, but I don't see any of it. Death is surrounding us. Other people we know die. But I don't see no authenticity. I don't see anybody rattled by that. The closest we would know to it is a funeral. But they all can't wait to get back and have a booze up.
Yeah.
And turn over the channel. And you can do this for all the other forms of anxiety. None of those forms of anxiety seem really to do the trick. What the hell is going on? Well, that's a legitimate question. And so, my book explores new angles. They're quasi-existentialistic, but I bring in a lot of other thinkers to try and dig deep on that and work that out. And it's for each reader to think, to themselves after they've read it to see whether this makes sense or not. But it's an ongoing thing, existentialism is not dead. Postmodernism and progressivism and what have you, critical theory may have got the headlights, the limelight, but these existential matters haven't gone away.
Yeah. Michael, so often you hear the term authenticity, authentic self, authentic path. I know it's something that we talk about. Like, what is that to you? Like, what is an authentic person to you?
Well, to me, it's just somebody, again, who's done this work, who is very, very preoccupied by the brevity of their existence, that I will not be, that the ones I love, when they're gone forever. They never return. What does this reverberate, you see, through my life? And then I watch myself going, because this is so dreadful, impactful, what do? Do I become a Buddhist? I watch this. You say, I watch the whole movement. Am I driven to the local church or the local, what do I do? Do I want to join the Mormons now, or, the 1%ers or something? Do I read some New Age books now? Do I start thinking about life after death and NDE? And, what am I doing to, and then where's the judgment? Am I self-judging that? Do I not do it? So a real self-observation comes in. And if you have this self-observation, then obviously many other things that people are involved in are no longer your interest. You're a very meditative person. You think deeply. And your relationships with others are going to drastically upgrade because you understand the miracle of it. How brief it is. This whole Hegelian thing, where most relationships start at just a master-slave level, you've just broken through that, mate. I don't know if Hegel worked that out, but you will not want master-slave primitive relationships with people when you are fully aware of this uniqueness and the the things that we've just discussed, you will self-transcend, and you will be much more meditative and contemplative, and not so embedded and welded into those things that are inauthentic, like science and religion, for all their benefits. You will not be immersed in those things to such an extent. And the wonder and the awe of life, again, just like that movie Fearless shows, that you will become more of an artist, if anything, than these other things. Doesn't mean you park them forever and they're not there. They are there, but they're no longer preoccupying your attention, because you're no longer trying to use them to flee away from self, from individuality, which the collective, of course, is the primary way that that's done.
Yeah. And it's an interesting kind of paradox, because it seems to me like the only way that someone comes to genuinely value these things that we're talking about is through immersion in the mundane and in the menial and in the gray and in the everydayness, and becoming sick of it, right?
Right. This can happen as well, and usually is one of the ways that people will move towards something. It will sing to them. You'll be very attractive.
Yeah.
Oh yes, there's no question about that. But you're right. It comes from then a certain fatigue with the everyday. There's no question about that. Das Man, the one, he transforms into Dasein, which is being there, right? Being here, a greater sense of grounding in the here, and not allowing his mind. And again, not. I think what happens really, the way I define it, is that the self-deceptiveness, which is rampant, decreases in the authentic person. His penchant for self-deception, that we just explained one of them. Hey, I really want to lose myself in the collective, but that looks bad optically, so I say I'm a scientist. I'm working for the betterment of the human race. Oh, fucking brilliant, did it. I'm not a collectivist. I don't think like anybody else. I'm a scientist. I'm trying to help the human race. And they have these window dressings and camouflage to disguise what's under it, which is existential. But I know that sounds bad, or my conscience berates me. It floods me with a form of anxiety, legitimate anxiety. Can't have that. So I'll create this mask where I'm a benevolent humanitarian philanthropist. I'm selflessly working to cure cancer. Well, there you go. Look at me in my white coat. You see all this fucking chicanery, all of this shit. And the fact that some of it yields benefits, that only helps the inauthentic person. Because the moment that you broach this question, they can be pointing to the umpteen things that do come out of it good. But the existentialist is not fooled by this. He knows that it can be based on self-deception. That's why half the fucking scientists are all alcoholics and deeply lonely people. They become to rely on the institution. They become institutionalized, and it's no different with the religious types. They have their own, balloon animals to worship and their own hobby horses. But the existentialist is interested in peeling away these falsities.
Mm-hmm.
Another one would be psychiatry, seeing through that lie, big pharma and all that.
Do you think all these side paths that people take, whether it's scientism or new ageism or whatever it might be, are a symptom of the individual not having sincerely contemplated death? Like they've turned to face death and they've gotten scared from it, and so they're looking for a multitude of ways to kind of skirt or tacitly avoid it?
Sure. And we even know that science is doing that. They're all into all this transhumanism.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Once you've got that piece, well, I don't know. Some people smile at it and, rightly so, just, what it is, so you're smiling at it. And others are like reeling in tragedy. Oh my God, is that what it's all about? So I don't know. I can't account for anybody's reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a bit of both. And most of us, like, you have to smile and you have to cry at the same time when you see all of this inauthenticity. But the main thing is to notice it in yourself and how you raise your children. Because this is ubiquitous. This ties into parentism. I've written books on that. And this is where a lot of the problems start, because there's a need to overcome and crush the individualism of children. But again, that will be done through self-deceptive means. Nobody who's a tyrant like that, except the most grotesque versions of it, most people have the tyranny, but they've window dressed it, just like in the same way I'm talking about. And they'll lie to themselves, they'll lie to the public, they'll lie to their children, about why it's being done. So again, this needs to be, they think that they're using the children to process their own anxieties that we just spoken of, because this anxiety has to go somewhere. And if it's not going into the authentic self-transformative form, right, which you should do, well, it's going to go somewhere. And, where do you think it goes, right? Into all the dysfunction that we know in the family unit is based in it.
Yeah.
A parent can yo-yo a child and make them feel so anxious. A tyrannical type of parent can use the fact that children have this ontological anxiety, and they can add to it, giving love, pulling it away, giving love, pulling it away. All this caper. We could have hours and hours and hours to talk about that.
Yeah.
Hey, Michael, do you think it's, let's say, a prerequisite to have an intimate relationship with nature? In order to, I guess, escape from the crowd, das Man into Dasein. And when I say intimate, I mean like more of a relationship as opposed to I'm just going there to have some fun. And
no, it's a central motif in Haidiger and in Marcel and others. Central. In fact, you see, they have man down as a trinity, and Eigenwelt is the self, Mitwelt is the world at large, the society, what we would call society and culture. And then there's one called Umwelt, around world, and that's nature, which couches the others. You see, and so man is a trinity. And the incarceration that we have in not just cities, but really ugly environments, this is something that Heidegger found unimaginably horrific, really grotesque, and is a symptom. A thing to look for about how nature is treated is a symptom. And he was not in favor of technology, and these kinds of things. So yes, you're right. Absolutely, for sure.
Well, and also too, like if you have that deeper, intimate relationship with nature, it's hard to escape contemplation of death because it's around you. Even if you're understanding the seasons and you're a gardener or whatever the case may be, like it's right there in front of you. So I feel like that impacts you on a deep level.
I argue in the book, you see, that it's so important because when we talked about this existential anxiety, is there actually medicine for it? And I say that there is. It's the natural world. The Umwelt and our relationship to the beauty of the world, from an artistic point of view, is the only thing that really can equalize and make sense of the suffering that comes from the anxiety. I'm not doubting that certain relationships with people can, but as we know, relationships with people can ramp up the anxiety, if anything. Mostly that's what we see, right? So, don't know about that, right? I'm not discounting that some relationships can lower anxiety, but come on. We know that mostly it's the opposite. But with nature, it's very different. There is something in nature of an apothecary, to pick up your point. And yes, Heidegger knew this too. I think any of the sane guys did as well. And they knew that anxiety will always be with us. But when you live in closer proximity to nature, there's something now at least to countermand it, something to put on the other pan, to help you equalize it so you're not drenched in it. But urban man, one-dimensional man, institutionalized man, he's going to be swallowed by it like being swallowed by a dragon, a monster. Eventually, he will subdue. And that's where Big Pharma comes in. Remember, we talked about that earlier. Big Pharma comes in knowing that this is the case in most people, that the anxiety levels are off the charts. So they step in with their artificial happiness to solve it.
To that point, and it seems as though obviously Heidegger is very central to existentialism. He's kind of removing the barrier between subject and object, right? And so like being becomes inseparable from nature in that sense.
Yeah, a lot of his early work and fame came from this attack on dualism, Cartesian dualism, Kantian dualism, of this hard subject versus object, metaphysical sort of paradigms, which he didn't like. You're right. However, having said that, I argue in one of the chapters that he was himself a dualist. If you grasped the essential movement of his life where he was into being and nothingness. Isn't that dualism right there?
Mhm.
Where you have being, you must have nothingness. So those people who harp upon this non-dualistic thing, they're right only to a point. He wanted to get rid of all the other, lesser important iterations of dualism so he could get around to the heart of it, to explore the stuff we've been talking about, so strange paradox there.
Yeah. Yeah. Michael, if I can ask you, like, how do you personally cultivate your own relationship with nature?
Yeah, well, growing up in Belfast, I was closer to nature than you mostly get in other places, although of course the tragedy of it is that the Irish couldn't care less about it and they've been tearing it up. There's nothing left.
Yeah.
But in the early days, we grew up really close to nature. And so I think that's about it. We had parks, and also just very deeply into poetry and art. So yeah, a lot of it came naturally, probably, responsible. I don't know if it was where we lived or I just was always very, very close to nature. And if I had my choice, I would be, even more involved in it. Sometimes it becomes difficult, if you don't have your own garden or you don't have access to it. But yeah, I've always tried to get away to the ocean or a natural place that's not too trammeled. It's getting more and more difficult. A lot of people are noticing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, as we continue on this path, how as we become more urbanized, what tools or what strategies people have to kind of maintain that connection and keep that cup full, particularly
Yeah.
as we continue to advance, quote unquote.
Yeah. Well, I think I totally believe that the more that you're in nature, the more authentic you will be. And as I said, there's a big theory there that whatever comes out of your relationship with nature is a counterbalance. It's a antidote to the anxieties, plural. You see, it's all about the damage we do to ourselves. It's very related into self-sadism. Most of these anxieties, by the way. So if you're in nature and living more languidly and you're close to water and animals and the open sky, I mean, what's the point of being self-sadistic? You're probably going to let go of that. You're going to put distance between you and your upbringing and your family and these other images of mankind that the media, put into your mind about who you should be and what you should be like and how you should be beating yourself up all the time. These things will obviously fade away. You're not going to give a damn because you're fulfilled by tilling the soil, by growing things, looking after animals, and all of this. There's going to be something more wholesome comes out. And I think that you'll be much more tuned to the voice of your conscience rather than the voice of your anxiety and the voice of your superego.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel ever since Sophie and I moved from Santa Monica to Topanga, and I've kind of taken on a personal relationship with bringing life back to the land and getting into gardening and permaculture and having chickens and, even more animals here and cats. And it's just, I can't imagine, it's non-negotiable for me now, especially like working online. We have an online business and we spend a lot of time online, which is great. Technology allows us to have this conversation. Technology allows us to impact people around the world. But like that's my space, when I'm outside, to get my fingers in the dirt and to feel the wind against my cheek and to plant a seed and to see it grow. I mean, I get so excited just to see things sprouting from the ground, especially, this is our 5th year here and starting to have a more intimate relationship with the seasons too. And understanding the process that they like the plants and the fruit trees and everything goes through is just it adds such value to my life, and it inspires contemplation just by being there. I can't not contemplate like being in nature. That's just
Right.
my personal experience.
Oh, absolutely. I very much envy that. When I came to America in '89, I'd been there before, but for the longest stay was in '89. And of course, I made a beeline for the California coastline. We have to work full time, but any moment we got off, a friend of mine, we would drive to Half Moon Bay, in the Pacific, coast road and try to swim, and even in the middle of winter, because, okay, there was nature in Ireland to a certain degree, but there was also terrible violence, remember. I grew up during the Troubles, and effectively this meant that nobody was out in the streets after 7 o'clock at night. In those days, it was really rough. People could never imagine it. So your access was slightly cut off, because of the danger there. Mm-hmm. If you were walking in the street, the police and army might have thought you were an IRA guy or something up to no good, and you could even be arrested. So it was tricky. Or you might even run into a gang and get your head kicked in, which is more frequent than you could possibly imagine over there, So, yeah. So when I got to America, I went, well, yeah, great, let's head up to the hills. Let's go to the forests. So it was kind of a liberating experience to be in California at that time. And I made nature very, very important, prominent. Yeah. I could never get enough of it.
Yeah. Can you speak more into Heidegger's ideas in being and time? Because I feel like many people that go to grasp Heidegger, and it can be complex, but I also feel like it can be quite simple. So I'm just wondering if there's any further comments you have in terms of Heidegger's central work, in terms of being and time, and like what is time, what is being, right, what is perception, things like that.
Well, the way I usually come at it is, remember we talked about the deconstruction of the previous metaphysical teachings and even materialism. Let me go into that maybe. You see, running down through that strain before existentialism came online was this materialism versus idealism, that dyad, in which the materialists said that the mind is blank and anything in it is put there by the world. Tabula rasa is the Latin, blank slate, blank mind, right? And they proved it because they said, try to find in your mind something that isn't found also in the world. And we couldn't do it. So this lent them a bit of credence. They went, well, everything in my mind, even if it's kind of fantastical, it's still made up of stuff that's in the world. Okay, looks like you guys might be right. And that launched empiricism, materialism, scientism, all of that got launched at this time. The idealists are going, we're not buying that. We believe in innate ideas. In Latin, it's a priori content, that the mind doesn't come in blank. It comes in with certain categories and structures that help us organize the world. Sensual stuff coming in through the senses gets organized conceptually. So we have these conceptual, they're called transcendental. It's a word that shouldn't be confused with transcendence that we used earlier. They're not the same. Mm-hmm. Transcendental are these categories of the human mind that help us structure the world that we know, the world we get. Now, these are the two opposing schools, and even to this day, they've never been properly reconciled. But to get to Heidegger, you've got to go through a guy called Edmund Husserl and the philosophy that's known as phenomenology. It has its own history. We won't get into that, right? But Heidegger was the secretary of Edmund Husserl, the chief brain behind this phenomenology. What? Right? And they parted company later. Heidegger developed it, moved away from it into his own thing. So to answer your question, this is the steps I usually go into. But back to this thing between the materialists and the idealists. Which one is right? But Heidegger's going, you're never going to answer it. What? Because these are questions about the nature of the mind. But why is it that no one's seen the answer? The mind itself cannot decide one way or the other. Everybody went, holy shit, how did we miss this? You can never find out with your own, even though these are questions about your mind, mm-hmm. Your mind can only speculate and only ever speculate. No matter how many millions of years go by, I will never know in my mind whether I'm blank slate or I'm not. And any statement, one to the other, is pure speculation. There's no concrete, definitive, pin it to a board, factual, conclusive knowledge to be had from these things that they've been dilly-dallying with. You mean to tell me that this is philosophy? Nobody had noticed this before. But of course, moving forward, the Heideggers were going, well, now that since we've pointed out, I'm just giving you a metaphorical story here, but it pertains to what they're doing. They said, well, since the reason this thing that you all have exalted, cannot decide even on this most mundane point, can never do so, why is philosophy so focused on the reason? And everyone was just stunned, right? It was just like, what the hell? And this is the modern age beginning. And so they said, instead of thinking being the center of philosophy, we should make it experience. And then everyone, whoa, let's get around this concept. They had to be walked through this because for decades, for centuries, what we're talking about, only one thing had been done: exalt the reason, exalt thinking. And that it was this that became the nexus of all world philosophy. And Heidegger is literally telling you, oh no, I see the flaw. And I'm just giving you an illustration. It's not his illustration, but this is a shorthand way of showing you what was going on there. My mind poses questions about its own identity, only to find out that after meticulously forming these wonderful questions and massaging the questions so that they're nicely, languaged and framed, it's a big nothing burger at the end. I can sit back forever and say, yeah, it's blank slate. My mind's blank slate. Nailed. Okay. How does that change the world? And the same other guy can go, we come in with innate categories. My mind already has these innate Kantian categories. Okay. So what? How has that changed anything?
Yeah.
And can you really prove it? Big nose at, nothing there, right? So then something radical had to change. And this is where Heidegger then comes in, because he's saying, get rid of thinking as the center of philosophy, and let's turn back to the things themselves. And it took years for this to become, solid. I really, to tell you the truth, I don't think it's even caught on that much. But to those few that it did catch on, it absolutely transformed art, and it transcended poetry. The poets and the artists were more likely to listen to him than the philosophers, who mostly rejected all of this and went straight back to materialism, scientism, and all the rest. Or they get the idealists on the other side, Or maybe if there was a third version, it's this highly deconstructive, sarcastic, Nietzschean, burn it all down, iconoclastic perspective that Heidegger did not buy into as well. He saw through the lie of that too, which was this disdainful muckslinging at philosophers with nothing really to offer in its place. You could say that of Schopenhauer, you could say that of Nietzsche. That's not the answer, says Heidegger. He was much more genteel and thoughtful than all of this noisy, obstreperous Nietzschean palaver that the world also, Nietzsche's hugely, as you know, successful and loved by the young. They don't see any of the flaws, they go for it. And that's fine, because he was a great writer. He was physically a brilliant, brilliant, expressive writer, as was Schopenhauer. So again, their philosophy is monumentally incoherent and contradictory, but the way that they wrote it attracted readers. Mm-hmm. It's so powerful in its expression. You have to really give them that.
Yeah. So Heidegger's saying being presupposes everything, which basically shoots arrows at, Descartes, I think, therefore I am.
Right. Yes, it definitely does. Yes. He deconstructed that beautifully and elegantly to show you that he replaced it with his concept of being in the world, a very, very embedded relationship between, again, mind, right? He's leaving out mind. He doesn't even use the word consciousness. Mm-hmm. Because he wants to get away from it. As I just said, doesn't want to get into thinking as the central issue. It's a beingness. And he wanted to flesh that out for people and, in a way, show that there's an immersion that you have, a deep entanglement with the world, whatever world is. And this was picked up by, Merleau-Ponty, that had a whole philosophy of body, soma. It connects with a lot of things that you do, because now it blends over into the role of the body, which Heidegger opened the door for that, but didn't quite follow it himself. But Maurice Merleau-Ponty picked this up. He was an existentialist in France, and he picked it up. And then through a thing called existential psychology, this also got, more traction. They were looking to Heidegger for this. And it did end up being important to somatic therapists because it's embodiment, right? Rather than this thing up here in the head. No, your physical embodiment in the world now takes on. So Feldenkrais, Ida Rolf, they're all Germans, right? They're going to be influenced by Heidegger, no end. And they're going to see a lot in Heidegger that they liked and Merleau-Ponty that they liked.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a tie-in to some of the, Wilhelm Reich. Believe you me, there's plenty of tie-in between Heidegger and those people, the somatic therapists. They may not admit it, but it's there. It's there for anybody who's intelligent to see.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my favorite concepts, even from, I guess, someone like Gurdjieff, is this idea of self-remembering, just even throughout the day, remembering that you are a self, remembering that you exist, remembering that you are here. And it feels like this is kind of connected to this beingness as well. It's like, oh, but I'm here also. Like that, just self-remembering as a form of meditation and contemplation.
Yeah. Remember we talked about Marcel's secondary reflection?
Mm-hmm.
It's identical to what you just said. That detachment, right? That I'm walking amongst other people in the crowd, but I'm not like them. I am omniplastically, I'm omnidirectional. I'm looking at my life in the greater context of why am I here? The bigger questions matter to me. They're very palpable. I'm not just immersed in primary reflection. Yeah. There's this sort of standing back and observing. I'm still engaged, though. See, it's the outsider is still engaged. This is the most extraordinary thing because it's really about attitude, not a physical posture. When it becomes a posture, it's fashion. Hey, I stand out. I'm a goth. I'm an emo, right?
Yep.
I'm a new ager. This is the self-deception. The actual authentic outsider will sit amongst you in a cafe. You'll never, ever spot him.
Yeah.
You'll never know what's going on there.
Because he's not performing. It's not a performance for him. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And he could be anywhere. He could be anywhere. He could literally be a corporate executive.
Mm-hmm.
And he's 10 times more authentic than anyone around him. This is the way it is. This is why it's so off the charts and unusual. It could be a guy working a machine all his life.
Yeah.
But he's there. Oh my God, he's there. He knows he has to live. He can't shrink away from it. He knows he's cooperative with other people, but you can cooperate with people without being a collectivist.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I have a bad tooth, don't I need to go to a dentist?
Mm-hmm.
But is that collectivism? Hell no, because the man who became the dentist did so because of an individual choice.
Yep.
Just in the same way that if I look closely at nature, it's not uniform, it's all individual. Leaves, trees, clouds. Right? Well, if I look close at mankind, it's individualism that made the technician. It's individualism that made the surgeon. It's individualism that made the dentist that I go to. And it's only a bunch of nutballs who go, well, we need each other, we're the collective. No. You've got your wires crossed here. The collective is it's like AI today. AI, you and I, we've all talked, the three of us, about Julian James's theories, about the bicameral mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. AI is an attempt to send us hurtling back out of individualism, out of subjective consciousness, back to this, robotic, mindless, I just hear voices and do what I'm told. The human race has been dying under the burden of selfhood, something it hates with a passion. I talk about this in the book. Now, the halfway point to that voice of the God in your head is collectivism. Why is this? Because if you read Julian James correctly, he says that the voices in the head that, were auditory hallucinations that directed your every move only worked well when communities were very small, in tribes that were basically microscopic. As towns and cities grew bigger, the voices faded. Right, so let's follow that thread for just a second. We can never get rid of the many. So that means the bicameral period is fucked, right? It's over, never to be seen again. Oh, no, that's not what he says. Because if I can collectivize the myriad, the multitude, aren't I simulating the small, right? See, most of these parallels we're talking about wouldn't be seen by anybody, but they are. If I can gather together like a fucking herd, then I have the gray, I have the one, I have das man. There may be physically many, but they're all thinking and acting the same. The bicameral voice is liable to come back now. Whereas the first reading said won't come back because people are too many. But if that many can be corralled and herded, right, into one small unit of thought, hey, bicameral instruction returns. Now, the apotheosis of this, of course, is full-blown AI in your head, where you are now, every single thing that you're doing is you're directed. That's the goal. We're hurtling toward it. But I believe that what we call collectivism, and thank you for giving me a moment to unpack that, collectivism is mankind's beloved decision, coveted decision to say, well, we're halfway there. We want to go back to that tribal small village where we can hear the voices of instruction so we don't have to be selves. It's monumental what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So the individual goes, oh, I'm not having none of that. I don't want no machine in my head or auditory hallucination telling me what to do. So I got to run the hell out of here. I got to, break the consensus. I got to do whatever I need to do. Say the alphabet in reverse. I got to think totally different because I'm not in lockstep with all of you people. I know where this leads,
Yeah.
So there's that dimension of it too that I think needs to be plugged in.
Well, it seems like a key thing that arises out of a sincere understanding of existentialism, regardless of what you're doing in the world, is that there's more intentionality behind what you're doing. You can commune with the collective, but regardless of what it is, it's not just, being herded along. It's a choice that one is making as a result of contemplating death, remembering one's being, etc.
Sure it is. You're the only creature that can do it. That can make yourself important in an authentic way. And you're the only one who can force your mind, throw your mind forward in time to see that one day it's over.
Yeah.
And there's no way out of that. And it doesn't even affect other questions of religion or spirituality. It doesn't. It's separate. It's a separate, because the religious man may live his whole life and never do what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And the atheist man might do it. So this cuts across. That's what Fearless is all about, that movie. I mean, you could be an ice cream salesman. You could be nobody of any real importance. You could be completely nondescript as far as the world goes. But you may have done this experiment one day sitting on a bus. And instantly you're transformed as a person. You're not the same.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting how, like, on a surface level, existentialism seems to get lumped in with like nihilism and atheism, but it's not that at all.
No.
No.
These are, again, mostly products of self-deception, for the most part. They're window dressing to prove that you're something you're not. Or they're there, as bromides to quell the anxiety that you're feeling, but you don't know how to go about quelling it properly because you'd have never been taught that there's legitimate anxiety and neurotic anxiety. See, the parenting, the education is so pathetic that none of these points are made clear to you, so you can't tell the difference between, the anxieties that are rising up, and that some of that anxiety is the very thing that's there to make you human, and it's not the stuff you want to get rid of. Yep. For goodness sake, you don't want to take a pill and quell it. That's the worst thing. That's why we get nothing but zombies walking around today.
Yeah.
And there's very few teachers out there to, warn, put out the warning. All we got is advertisements and Prozac smiles and artificial happiness and everybody going for it, thinking, oh, if I ever, do feel real existential suffering, I know I go, how to knock out on the head. Mm-hmm. And I don't see the consequences. We dealt with this in Architects of Control and other programs that I've done years and years and years ago. We did a whole small series on it, actually, in the times past. But the time wasn't right then, to write the book or anything, everything in its own time, I think.
Yeah.
Michael, can you talk into the relationship between like psychology and philosophy?
Well, for me, right, the connective between them two is, this is one of them. Because a couple of men that Haidiger knew personally, he corresponded, he met them, he knew them well, was Ludwig Binswanger and Medard Boss and their people. And they were absolutely enamored by, Heidegger and the things that we're talking about. They were also big fans of a guy called Otto Rank that I've done, plenty of programs about on Unslave. And, Kierkegaard would have been a big one for them as well, So they said, we don't like the kind of psychiatry and psychology that's out there, in terms of Freud, Jung, and the popular ones. But we think that Heidegger, although Heidegger, he seems to not like psychology. He never talks about it, and he seems to frown on it. We feel we have the right to create a new kind of psychology, and that's what they did. And so Heidegger did correspond with him. He even knew Viktor Frankl, another really towering great mind. The very first person that Heidegger went to visit when he came to Vienna was Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl is the psychologist who came up with the theory of will to meaning, to counterbalance Nietzsche's absurd will to power palaver. And I find it absolutely fascinating, that those two met and talked. So there's that. And so when some psychologists like Adler and others took a more Nietzschean, atheistic slant, there was a school, it's very unknown now. And then this brings us to another reason why I wrote my book. Sadly, existential psychology and existentialism itself is now in the hands of the uber woke. So I was just incensed by that. They've hijacked a lot of things, right? We know that. They've hijacked politics, ecology, sociology, and now they've hijacked existentialism. Post-modernism, right? They hijacked philosophy. But they got their hands on existentialism, and it's just awful what's happening right now. So I try to write my book, for people who might be interested in it, but not politicized, so they can, like we're doing right now, we can talk about it in this very common sense way, neutrally, without any political statement.
Yeah.
I think it's vital now because it's in the hands of the enemy right now.
How does it look, to take existentialism and existential psychology and have it be wokeified? Like, how is that showing up in the world?
Well, they don't want to know any of the teachers we've mentioned because they were white and European. Okay. It's so banal. It's so infantile. Because Heidegger, Jaspers, Marcel, Sartre, hell, they don't even want to talk about the left-wing guys because they were white. That's what I mean by uber woke. Woke would say, we love Sartre, we love Camus, we love de Beauvoir, we love Foucault. They're Marxists like us. No, they don't even want to talk about those people, left-wing as they are, because they're white and European. Okay. Quick, where's the exit? How do I get out of here? Yeah, come on.
Does this tie into Germanophobia at all?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. There's this underlying, Germanophobia that has always been there in British thinking. We could talk for hours about how it began, It actually goes back to the early 1800s, but it ramped up around 1909. Well, of course it would, right? You had First World War, Second World War. So by even 1950, the German is not particularly friendly, And Heidegger happens to be writing exactly at this time. So naturally, yeah, there's definitely that sort of penchant to misrepresent. But the ideas were overthrowing the entire metaphysical tradition. Heidegger was well known to have thrown English positivistic books across the room. Thought it was all, rubbish. So they hated him in return. So yeah, there is this element as well. Absolutely. Yeah. You'd be surprised. And I think that when they wanted replacements. So when they found Foucault, the Frenchman, and when they found Derrida, the Frenchman, they went they bankrolled those two guys in order to shut down Heidegger. I can mention those two for a start. There were others. And there were good voices as well that came to try and help Heidegger. His mistress, Hannah Arendt, did a lot for him in America. She was Jewish. And others, many Jewish pupils that he had, tried to, write books to celebrate his work. But unfortunately, in his class, he also had Herbert Marcuse. So he had some of the worst in his class, and he had some of the other ones that were so much more moderate and rational. So he was a great teacher and had a very, very interesting career, just because he was a Jesuit Catholic early in his life, but he rejected that. Him and his wife rejected Catholicism, so he had quite an interesting existence. He had a dalliance for a short time with the Nazis. Well, that deteriorated very fast, and the Nazis disowned him as a very bad choice on their part. And also he got worldwide censure for that short-term flirtation with Nazism. It basically did ruin his reputation. So people didn't want to know about his philosophy because of, all sorts of things like this, that the mudslinging that took place.
Yeah. So like Heidegger is proposing like a deep immersion between being and world.
Yes.
And so if you take the opposite stance in terms of a hard separation, is this kind of where many Gnostic ideas are also born from? Like, I am not of the world, and so I need to conjure up all these ideas to separate myself from it, consider how I'm going to live forever, consider why the world might be a simulation, why it might be this, etc., because there's this separation between oneself and the world.
Oh, great question. And you're absolutely right. To understand Heidegger properly, you've got to think of him as about as far away from Gnosticism as you could possibly get.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's not sometimes obvious because of the extreme, complexity of his ideas and the way he wrote. But this is what it breaks down to. Yeah. He was about as anti-Gnostic as you could possibly get. And his understanding of man's embeddedness in the physical world is the central piece, and it takes time to unpack that. It's what I was noticing in these poets, but couldn't understand. I liked it. See, I liked it, but I didn't know what wellspring are they drawing from? What is this thought, this Germanic thought of the modern age? So by getting into Heidegger, it's the what do they call it? It's the what's that word? Not the mother lode. It was the mother lode, when you're finding Heidegger, this mystery that I carried through for years about not understanding these bloody poets, you can understand them now. It's like it's like an old manuscript that you can't decipher, but then you find the Rosetta Stone. Yeah. And you put the Rosetta Stone here and you put the manuscript there and you go, oh, all right, it's painstaking, it's slow, but yeah, I'm checking the list off. For me, this is what it was.
Yeah.
It took 32 years to today of nonstop doing it, but that's what it takes.
Yep. We might have already covered this in certain side pieces, but just to hit it more directly, what is the role of time in Heidegger's work and existentialism? Like, what is time?
Well, it's everything in his work, right? Because through it, he got the crowbar under Hegel, under the metaphysical tradition, under Descartes, under Kant, and he threw them all over. It's through his concepts of time. See, he looked at these three ecstasies of time, past, present, future, and he looked at it in this existential context, temporal to human beings' own life, and how they project their mind along this timeline. As we said, the future is important, right? But he said because these other philosophers had missed this, they made several mistakes. And one of them was to take this thing called time, and in order for them to understand it, they kind of inflated it in a metaphysical way. And one example that he would have used is Hegel. Hegel's fascinating concepts of history. Time starting hundreds, thousands of years ago, and then moving to where we are now, and then continuing on as if it's almost like the spirit, Geist. The word Geist in German means both mind and spirit. So it's a catch-all. You can think of it atheistically by just the movement of human consciousness, but if you're spiritual, Hegel works for you too, because you can say, well, the same word means spirit, and this is the movement of God or Geist. So he's able to incorporate both the two sides, in his theories. But the temporal aspect of this constant movement down through time of a kind of a consciousness is the center of Hegel's work. And that was picked up by a lot of other people and made into, what time is. This was the idea. And that what we call history is the sort of terrestrial living out of the movement, the different stages of the Geist. And therefore, and of course, there's a lot of sense to this, because every single thing around us is the product of history. Even the clothes or, machine-made clothes, there's a whole history behind every t-shirt, every weave, right back to the first needle and thread, for God's sake, right? These microphones, everything has a history. And Haidiger says, Hegel said, so do our thoughts. We are always at a certain place in time based on antecedent processes that need to be analyzed, and that's what his philosophy does. Heidegger is looking at all of this, and other iterations of this as well with other philosophers. He's going, you got it all wrong. The movement of time is not this larger, inflated world movement. It's this individual temporal movement, much smaller, much more close to home. But in order to try and escape temporal finitude, you've purposely, in an act of self-deception, projected it up and out. And he did this with all these philosophers, right? He did this with Kant, he did it with Hegel and the big boys, and he did it with Descartes, and he showed how and why their philosophies come about. And there's all a means of avoidance of this real time, which is temporality. Another way to look at it is he said that the time that the clock time, is another escape. It doesn't exist. It's called ontic or vulgar time. And it's the time we love to live in, calendars and fixed dates and fixed festivals and 12-hour clocks, 12 months. All of this is fake. This is the regular kind of time that stabilizes us when we're shocked by the existential threat of, our death.
Is it fair to say that like time in that sense is like the form of human life?
Well, it is the defining characteristic of man, yes, because he's the one who knows that it's happening. Oh yes, it's that important, right? And it's one of the sources of this deep, deep anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
That is the only thing that can make you authentic. So of course, when you're talking about authenticity, then time is the catalyst.
Yeah.
Sure, the brevity of your time or the loss of somebody, you only need to read Tennyson's In Memoriam. It can really, really dwell, and they can be shocked out of their complacency. And he believed that each person needs to look at this squarely and sincerely and realize that one day all the things they care about, all the things that they... See, look, our lives are filled with immersion, with tools, and equipment to facilitate. It's like a man building a house, right? Everything we do is for the tomorrow. It's for the sake of something. We are very future-orientated people.
Yeah.
And so it comes as a counterintuitive thing to know that one day, everything I'm doing now is contextualized by tomorrow. But at the end of my tomorrows is the possibility that all my other possibilities are shut off. So the authenticity then is the returning from that state to say, I better look hard at the possibilities I have. I can't just choose them all. I'm not like a child in a candy shop. I've got a very short time. So what do I prioritize? What becomes of value? Remember we talked about the plugins of Ayn Rand? Heidegger's got his own way of coming around to this.
Yep.
By saying, well, you'll soon find out what you value when you know it's all going to be taken away. You will not allow yourself to be immersed and absorbed in trivia, at least permanently, right? You won't live your whole life in this inauthentic manner. And believe you me, this had a huge ripple effect into the world. Not so much with philosophy, but with art, artists and poets, playwrights and musicians and filmmakers. It really did catch on for that time,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
Michael,
gateway
what
to
I-
true presence, even beyond New
That's
Age
it.
teachings of presence.
Yes, it is. And we still do use it. It's there, right? It's definitely there. Because some of our greatest directors, people who've changed the world with their movies, they were all into this, by the way. Make no mistake about it. Peter Weir, Nicholas Roeg, Ridley Scott. We're influenced this whether we like it or not. Who's the guy who made the Truman Show? Yeah, Nicholas. It was Peter Weir, right? So yeah, it's there. And then the copycats of those, will try to reprise these existential themes. They're still there, all right. But it's a taste.
Mm-hmm.
Some people like it, some people don't.
Yerasimos, you have anything? Seemed like you were going to interject there, and I jumped the gun.
No, I was just gonna highlight things that kind of relate to what we're talking about. We've had this conversation before about memento mori.
That's right.
The death contemplation. When I first came across that concept, it changed my life. And I've even recently, Sophie and I I've been just sitting with her and being like, that this is all gonna just be like, I'm not gonna know you one day.
Yep.
You're gonna be gone. I'm gonna be gone.
That's it.
And I like thinking about those things. I mean, I don't live with it all day, like, in this dark, morbid sense, but it really highlights the delicacy and the beauty of existence.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
Well, there's a deep vulnerability that arises, which I don't think can be separated from this word authenticity.
Well, Haidiger said that in the house that he had with his wife, he went poetically into the table in the kitchen where him and his wife sat making the greatest decisions of their life. And he said, isn't this table important? See, it's a new way of thinking, right? The table is important because you and I have sat at this table in these incredibly important moments.
Yeah.
But normally it would be invisible. It would be something we just throw in the junk heap once it's over and done with. And that's okay. There's something that's all right about that. We don't need to become hoarders. But we also should notice the world of the inanimate around us if we were looking from the eyes of an artist.
Yeah.
And all he was doing was giving an illustration of exactly what you're talking about. These numinous moments in which, you are having this secondary reflection. Of course, we know that it's very rare to have it in the company of another. Right? I mean, we can have it. You know how many lonely people are sitting right now in a garret somewhere or a little apartment? They're doing this, but they don't have anyone near them that's doing it too.
Mm-hmm.
So be very, very conscious of the fact that if you're doing it and someone you love is doing it, that is absolutely unique. There's something extraordinary about that. It's a very great gift that two people on the same path or road, can be courageous enough to walk with that and be in that state of, they also call it the great nostalgia is another term for it, but it's this state of gratitude.
Yeah.
And Heidegger did notice that in etymology, the word for thinking, denken, is etymologically similar to the word for thank you or gratitude, danke, danken. Now, why he said are those two words? So he said, they're the same. It's because real thinking is gratitude. So when somebody said, he didn't come up with no answers, I wanted answers and I didn't get nothing. Oh, no, he came up with answers all right. They're just too subtle for you to get. He was talking about that thinking should be a deep state of gratitude for what we do have in front of us. And I really related to that. These are the kind of things that just were like mind-boggling to me. So yeah, I would say a funeral. I know that your father passed away not too long ago, and your mother's probably still reeling with that, dealing with that. You guys are.
Yeah, we just moved. We just sold our house in New Jersey, 45 years last month, and moved my mom out here to live with us. She's living with
Well, look at that.
Yeah.
Now think of that, right? Think of that. And then there's what Heidegger beautifully called thoughtful memory. He didn't want people shrugging this off and just moving on. He also talked about the past and about thoughtful memory. We have it for a reason. It's an attribute that is falling by the wayside as people don't have memory. They don't allow themselves to think deeply about who they were in the past, what their aspirations were. As we said, what were your aspirations for your own future? You see? And then you checklist to say, yeah, I've achieved those things. I've achieved some. In fact, life may have even offered me better things, than what I even hoped to have.
Yeah.
Today, life is moving so fast, we barely have the moment to even think about that and assess and take an inventory. Or really be grateful for the meaningful relationships that we have that we value. So there's another area, where Ayn Rand's work does have parallels to something that on paper has no connection. But I find these connections. The whole question of gratitude. She'd agree with every word that Heidegger's talking about.
Yeah, of course, because love for her was an incredibly selfish act. And
Right.
with contemplating existentialism and one's death, everything becomes a selfish act. Everything becomes a personal priority.
I always say in my work that personalism is the inevitable end game, of existentialism, for all the reasons we've talked about. Because all the things we've talked about, it doesn't matter how another person handles it, contemplates it, and the conclusions, right? It passed through their little gray cells, not yours. So what they come up with is fine for themselves. It has no bearing on your cogitation of it. Yeah. But that comes with a responsibility, you see? And that responsibility seems too heavy for everybody else who now is relying on the expert.
Yeah.
I really mean it. We are heading away from individualism at a frightening rate. AI is collectivism was another one, right? It was a invention to try and simulate tribal thinking, so that we will be able to unseat the case for individualism. And AI is that. Maybe people don't see that on the surface because they haven't read their Julian Jaynes, and they don't know that for how many thousands and thousands of years we lived as non-subjective persons. We just were robotic. And we want that again. The burden, in order to understand our world, you've got to realize that selfhood is not valued or loved at all. Despite all the window dressing and the fashion statements, the one thing people are morbidly, necrophilously antithetical to is selfhood. They're necrophilous rather than biophilous. They're lovers of death, not lovers of life. And once this is fully grasped and understood, you can now move like Nostradamus, in the middle of the whole of the fucking lie of it. You're no longer able to be fooled because you've got this. Although this is a painful fact to understand, once you understand it, you are the sage. And many things that would be impenetrable for you to understand now start falling into place. And this includes philosophies. Why did certain philosophies happen? Are they part of the self-deceptiveness? Are they part of this abstraction, the need for abstraction? We've already proven that thinking, reason, we reach a limit. And if I reach that limit, what do? Carry on saying, well, science will have a chip. Yeah, you're right about that. The mind can't answer a couple of questions, some very important questions, but it will it will tomorrow. Excuse me. It will tomorrow. Oh, okay, then. You mean after I'm gone, dead? No, that's right. Yeah. We'll sort it out. Isn't that a collective statement? Who's this we? If I'm not going to be here for it, and you're telling me my children won't be there for it, who's this anonymous we that's going to benefit from a discovery in science 2,000 years from now? You see how fucking self-deceptive that is? I'm here now, pal. I want to know now what the answer to this is. Oh, no. It'll come in time. Give them more money. Yeah. And I'm satisfied with that, as most people are. Or some religion that takes you off-world to some abstract supernaturalisms and expect me to, believe that. And we do. You see, because having these limited choices, we say, well, and then there's this, just blind atheism or hedonism in the middle. I can choose not to think about it at all. Just get on TikTok, just follow P. Diddy and the Kardashians. I'm not going to think at all, which is what most people are doing. movies have predicted this, like Equilibrium and V for Vendetta, and so many others we could mention, right? These are all chimeras. Science is going to solve it. Tomorrow we'll have a new leader who'll get up there with just the right talismanic terms, and we are only too happy, to follow it. But have I done any real cogitation myself? Is my own life of value? Because if my own life is not of value, how can I really say that I value anybody else?
Mhm.
And then if I'm drenched in dread and drenched in anxiety, I fucking deserve to be. Because I have not opened a dialogue with my own conscience. I've thrown away my conscience. I've thrown away myself. And it goes without saying, I've mentioned it in other podcasts, then you should be unwell. I want you to, I think isn't it perfectly, and I would say it for myself. If I've done the dirty and I've thrown away selfhood, what the hell? I should be steeped.
Well, yeah. The main problem would be if you weren't feeling anything at that point. Like that'll be a
There
way
you
bigger
go.
problem.
Right. And that is the problem. Look at this artificial happiness cult.
Yeah.
One, it's just like movies like Dune have showed. We're getting to a point of critical mass that when this dread of life, gets to a point where it's unbearable, they'll have the super pill. They will have a super drug. These movies like Equilibrium and all, they are absolutely on the button. We will cry out for it. It won't be something they force on us.
Mhm.
It'll come in the form of a chip, or it'll come in the form of some headset, or it'll come in the form of a pill, or maybe a combination of all. And we will be glad. We will be free of freedom. Freed of the burden of being a self. That's the secret of secrets. And once you understand it, you'll know what people are all about, and be on guard at least. You'll have the edge. And you'll have the edge on the other side. You'll be able to tell an authentic person who's not falling into that category. You'll have a greater gauge to see somebody who's fucking sincere.
Yeah.
And who, like yourself, is not okay with this at all. And they'll have a vital interest in the reading, in what they watch, in what they do of a day. They won't stomach triviality. And most likely they're going to be vocational as well. Not just recreational or occupational and satisfied with that. You have to do those things. I'm not saying you shouldn't have those dimensions in your being. Of course you should. But a certain point comes where you can put those aside. They're no longer satisfying to your, own being. And you being vocational will then take over.
Yeah.
And it might mean big sacrifices. You might have to shut up shop, like many of your guests say, I just give that up. I had a great job in the corporate world. Fuck it. I told them to go fuck themselves. I'm out of there. I had to do something different. Right.
Yeah.
I had to write that book. I had to go to the ends of the earth. I had to go cold turkey for a while. I had to renounce. You'll be able to plot that and go, yeah, oh, that's good. That's a step of an authentic person. I can see what you're reading, what you're studying, the music you listen to, all of these things come to bear. It's a big help. As opposed to somebody who's putting on a performance, as you said earlier, a fashion statement of being unique,
Yeah.
And all this. The world is absolutely excellent at that. The world's full of hysterics doing exactly what we've just talked about, putting on, and there'll be more acts of fake authenticity as we go. The human race is absolutely brilliant at that. Don't know what's coming next.
Curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael. This has been absolutely incredible just to absorb this information and unpack this philosophy and this idea on a deeper level. And no doubt I see the immense power in this for sure. And, I hope that listeners have received that as well. And yeah, thank you so much as always.
Thank you for giving me the chance. I mean, it's we went quite far actually. Rather than just an introductory, we touched on some of the deeper issues there, which is really, really good.
Yeah.
I don't get that chance a lot.
Well, we love having you on, man, and we love going deep with all the stuff that you're working on. So yeah, much appreciated. Michael, you started a Substack recently. Was it in the last year? You want to tell our audience how they can find you and support you and what you got going on there?
Well, I believe the book is exclusively on Substack too. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And other articles pertaining.
Yep.
My website just got so jam-packed, it became hard to navigate with articles. So we repurposed it. Substack's good because it's growing and it's easy for people to share data. See, if you like an article, it's easy, boom, you can email it to your friends and share it. I like that. And it's a kind of a media that's different than other social media platforms because it's for writers, and there's good ways to promote your work. So it worked for me. Maybe I'll change tomorrow into something else, but right now it worked just fine. To organize the book, there's a lot of work went into it. You can imagine after 32 years, what chapters to put in, where, how to pare it down. It has a lengthy introduction. So Substack helped me put that together.
Is the full book on there now, or are you releasing it little by little?
No, it's all done now. It was all done in April.
Right.
Cool. And what is your Substack, Michael? Just for those that are listening, how do they find it?
Just Michael Tsarion.
Perfect. Okay.
And
cool.
Unslaved is there as well. So you can go to either Unslaved, but if you want the book and other articles, go to Michael Tsarion.
Cool. We'll grab those specific links and put them in the show notes for people for sure.
Yeah, great.
Cool. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we'll see you next time. Take care. And that wraps up today's journey. But hey, the truth train doesn't stop here. Every Friday, we drop little nuggets of wisdom straight to your inbox. We're talking mind-expanding ideas, heart-opening perspectives, and the kind of content that hopefully makes you go, whoa, I never thought of it that way. Our Friday drops like having coffee with that friend who always blows your mind. Except this friend shows up right on schedule and never asks to borrow money. So if you want to join our truth-seeking tribe, it's super easy. Just hop over to hereforthetruth.com/Friday and hit that subscribe button. No spam, no fluff, just pure, unfiltered goodness delivered weekly. So if you're ready to make your Fridays a little more truthful, a little more inspiring, and a whole lot more awesome, your future self will thank you for this one. See you next time. And remember, we're always here for the truth, and we're always here for you.